My name is Andrew Rasuguriechi. An education economist and lecturer in the Faculty of Education. And whenever the budgeting process is being discussed or prepared, I get quite concerned because I work in an institution, a public institution, and I understand the importance of the budgeting process um, because most of the education institutions in Kenya, especially those that rely on government funding, are quite many, and they are increasing to an extent that now we have over 70 plus universities and university colleges, most of which are funded by the government. So, and from time to time, um, there are the activities and programs of those institutions are affected because of funding. And so I'm going to talk about three key areas or considerations of educational financing. The first one being adequacy of resources. In other words, adequacy of funds that are going to be allocated to the education sector. We understand the importance of education institutions and education um, processes, which are a key in generating the much needed human capital for the country and the region and the world. So when these resources are not adequately provided, or they are not adequate, all right, uh, most of those institutions that depend on government funding will not be able to perform their mandates. And I have the privilege of being a member of the governing council at the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, which I often refer to as the nerve center of Kenya's education, especially basic education below university. Now, that institution, for example, in addition to all other education institutions, is uh, affecting or influencing what is happening in many schools, not only public schools, but also private schools, because that is where the curriculum or the curricula are prepared, and they prepare even the learning resources. So when they do not have, or when they don't receive adequate funding, I can uh, uh, I, I can imagine your bet is as good as mine. That institution, KICD, cannot manage its mandate. And that means, especially for the last few years, since the government rolled out the competence-based curriculum, if the institute does not have adequate resources, so adequacy of resources, then its mandate will not be met. And consequently, the rest of the institutions that depend or that collaborates with the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development will be affected, all right? And that's why ultimately the learning processes will be hampered. So that's why even our primary schools our secondary schools, our TVET institutions will not, without adequate funding, they will not be able to carry out the mandate, their mandates effectively. And we are talking about resources which are known, the amounts or estimated, required resources are known by the Ministry of Education, which of course communicates the same to our National Treasury. So as a result of, in the past, inadequate funding, and I don't want to blame the government because the government allocates what is available, all right? But we are talking about the importance of ensuring that the available resources should be allocated to near adequate resources for our education institutions. Now, as a result of what has been happening over the time, a number of youths and graduates of mid-level colleges, graduates of our universities, end up without skills and adequate training. And no wonder, of course, many of them do not find jobs because employers are keen to hire those people, graduates of mid-level colleges or universities that have appropriate and relevant skills, adequate skills. So when these institutions are not adequately funded, obviously what happens is anybody's guess. And we need to find ways of planning appropriately so that we have near, if not fully adequate resources for the education sector. Now, the second consideration, there are three key considerations. The second consideration in educational financing is efficiency in processing and allocating the resources for the education institutions. Now, around the time when schools are being opened, primary schools, secondary schools, especially those that depend on government funding, there are calls regarding the amounts that are expected for that for the terms or academic terms, and they do not. Those institutions do not receive them at the appropriate time. So that affects learning and the education production function. When resources are supposed to be combined, all right, the nerves, when learning is supposed to take place, it's not taking place. So the duration of learning is reduced because there are no resources to funding to buy the required resources and so on and so forth. So efficiency in allocating and processing those resources is key, and that's why my appeal, our appeal to the government of Kenya is to ensure that appropriate planning is done so that once resources have been allocated, then they should be dispatched quite in time. I'm aware, having worked closely with the Ministry of Education, that Treasury is the one that dispatches the resources with the advice from the ministry. So I hope that there are not going to be gaps of resources delaying, or resources delaying to get to the education institutions, because then they will not serve what they are intended to serve. So, and that requires a lot of alertness on the information obtained from schools, right, through the county directors of the Ministry of Education, to the Ministry of Education headquarters, and as analyzing those data and dispatching them at the right time to Treasury, so that the Treasury is not does not delay the resources. I may not understand why at times we have those delayed resources, and yet they are already, the ministry or the government of Kenya has been planning to make those allocations and dispatch them. So there's need for efficiency in processing and ensuring that those resources are received in the respective education institutions. The third key area or factor that must be considered is the effectiveness in the use of those resources. Now, I'm sure the government has guidelines and mechanisms of that are known to the recipient institutions regarding how the resources are to be utilized. But as a Kenyan, I've been a teacher in secondary schools, in technical institute before I joined the university many years ago. And I'm always in touch with the education institutions during research and during times when we visit schools to assess our students whom we are training as teachers, and they go to practice in schools. So we have that privilege of visiting schools, and we understand what goes on in there when we discuss with the heads of those schools. So the effectiveness of in the use of those resources is important, but again, these three factors are interrelated, or the one can affect the other. All right. If the resources that have been allocated are not adequate, then once they are, and then they are not received in the education institutions at the right time, then what happens is anybody's guess. The institutions, schools, teacher training colleges, national polytechnics, national universities, or universities, of course, all of them receive students, and the government funds those students wherever they go. So then learning is affected, and hence those resources will not be effective, right, to bring out the desired results, because they have not been allocated, or they have not been sent to the schools at the right time, and maybe they have not been efficiently utilized. And I was saying, there's need for the Ministry of Education and other stakeholders to ensure that there are thorough mechanisms of checking on what is happening, all right, to avoid how do you call it, gaps and inappropriate use of the same scarce funds or resources. Now, that is where the role of the Ministry of Education and its agencies, the Teacher Service Commission, as well as the sub-county or field of officers of the Ministry of Education are important. If they are not appropriately supported and directed and guided, then it becomes very difficult to even follow up what is happening. And that's why some institutions do not have, some secondary schools do not have adequately prepared or resourceful laboratories. All right. I thank God for the privilege I have had of serving as a chairman of board of a school in one village in the countryside, and I facilitated the generation of or the acquisition of resources that were used to put up a building which is now housing a laboratory that was started at the time I joined the board of governors of the school. So without taking care of these three factors or three areas, adequacy of resources, efficiency in allocating and processing of those resources, and the effectiveness in the use of those resources, then your guess is as good as mine. And that's why we pray that the officers in charge from Treasury, Ministry of Education, county directors, and all the way to the education institutions. All right. There's need to ensure that resources are well delivered, well received, and well utilized. Now, having said that, I am quite aware that some of the sources of funds that are used in education institutions, especially in our universities, are not sustainable, all right? Or they are inadequate. There is need, and this is passionate to my heart. I'm passionate about what I'm going to say, that there's need for, especially higher education institutions, to be encouraged, maybe through some developing policy, appropriate policies to encourage higher education institutions to generate their own revenue to supplement or to complement what they receive from government. Because it will be quite unfair to imagine that the government of Kenya will have adequate resources to finance all education institutions. And that's why I talked about the three key factors. So revenue diversification is important, and there's need for these institutions to be encouraged. Even primary schools, secondary schools have a lot of resources, idle land where they can do a bit of farming and so on. Thank you. Let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yeche, for giving us some highlights. And thank you very much for also reminding us about the importance of the budget process in Kenya, particularly the formulation stage. This is where you are able actually to share your views with the various sector players so that they can be incorporated in the main document, that is in the estimates of expenditure and revenue. But you have shared with us, I think, three key areas that is of concern And the three key areas, I will just highlight them, is that there is inadequacy of resources. But one of the things that we need to bring in the limelight is that the educational sector, in terms of budget, I think they are the one who receives the highest proportion of resources, almost 27% of the national budget. Number two, you share with us in terms of making sure that there is efficiency in the processing, and that is something that has been happening in this country. That in terms of disbursement, particularly to the ministry, in terms of capitation, the issues of readiness, those are things that has been emanating now and then. And then the other things that you raise is the whole question of effectiveness in the use of those resources. How, in terms of even utilization, out of the resources, out of the money that the institutions under the Ministry of Education have, how well do how well do they ensure that they utilize those resources? And finally, you share the aspect of ensuring that even in terms of our ministries, how best can they be able to generate, to diversify how we can be able to get more resources so that we can be able to add more resources to our own sector. So thank you very much for sharing with us those insights. I think we will be able to have a further discussion and make sure that we are able to incorporate in the main document. I need to mention two things. One is that what we do is that all the presenters will be able to make all their presentation. And then what we can do is that we have a floating bar. You can be able to type and you type your question so that after all the presentation has been done, then we'll be able to have a Q&A question where our our presenters will be able to address either a concern or even the Institute of Economic Affairs issues to do with budget will be able to address all those issues. Now, this time I want to welcome Mr. Tony Juma from ISPAC so that he can be able to share with us budgetary priorities for the youth of Kenya. And I understand he has a presentation. Kindly share your presentation, Tony, so that we are able to, and welcome. You have 25 minutes.
Big thank you to the Institute of Economic Affairs for consistently organizing such forums where we are able to engage and gain insights into matters of the economy. As was mentioned, my name is Tony Juma, and I work with the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya under the Public Policy and Research Directorate. And I'm very much delighted to be here, particularly as someone who once previously attended some of these forums as a participant, and now honored to be contributing to the discussion. So I have a brief presentation, which I'll be sharing on the screen shortly. The focus of my presentation will be on the youth of Kenya as a budget priority for the financial year 2025-2026. And I'll be guiding you through a few slides, which will be talking about the importance of prioritizing the youth in the budget, key socioeconomic challenges facing the youth, an analysis of government expenditure and prioritization programs, incentives and drivers of change for the youth, and I'll conclude with budget proposals aimed at improving the living standards for the youth. But just before I do so, allow me to provide a brief introduction about ISPAC. So ISPAC is the professional body established by law to register certified public accountants and to regulate the accountancy profession in Kenya. Currently, its membership stands at over 35,000 members, which also just goes to show the broad spectrum of professionals who are working in different sectors of the economy. So under the Accountants Act, ISPAC is mandated to perform a range of functions. And for today's discussion, I would like to just highlight one of these, which is to advise the Cabinet Secretary of Finance on matters relating to financial accountability and governance across all the sectors of the economy. And we fulfill this mandate by engaging with our members to submit proposals on recommendations on key national issues such as tax policy reforms, budget policy, public sector financial management, management of public debt, and also strategies to enhance financial inclusion. Back to the focus of today's presentation, and I know most of you could be asking why the focus on the youth. Now, every country faces both opportunities and challenges when it comes to implementing policies that support youth engagement, especially in economic growth. For us in Kenya, these interventions are included in our Vision 2030 blueprint, which is under the social pillar. And as a UN member state, Kenya also operationalized some of the goals on creating institutions and frameworks for engagement of the youth in national development. So our constitution defines youth as individuals between the ages of 18 and 35. And in our last census, 75% of Kenya's population was found to be under the age of 35. And this proportion is also projected to increase. So as a first point of concern, it was projected that by 2030, which is just 5 years away, we will be attaining a double-digit economic growth rate. As at 2024, we attained an economic growth rate of, it is projected at 4.8. And this is besides having a high population of the youth. Now, there have also been other developments that have sharpened the focus on the youth. Last year, we witnessed youth-led protests driven by frustration of taxation policies and the rising cost of living. Following these protests, the National Treasury revised the country's economic growth projection downwards due to the adverse impact of social unrest. Young people in Kenya are also increasingly facing mental health challenges. I think a study done by the World Health Organization ranked Kenya among the countries with the highest suicide rates in sub-Saharan Africa. There have also been challenges with youth employment, unemployment, and underemployment reported in various sectors of the economy. We've also seen recent strikes in the public sector, especially among young professionals regarding unfulfilled agreements or poor working conditions. And now as we are in 2025, the political climate in Kenya, particularly now as we approach the midterm of the current administration, there could be some heightened tensions, and the youth are likely to be manipulated into this political discourse. Sometime last year, and I know with other previous attempts on migration, the Ministry of Labor has had migration reforms, but there's still a challenge, especially of many young Kenyans engaged in low-skill occupations abroad, and some in even unfavorable working conditions. And despite some significant investments in youth development by the government under the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, the uptake of some of its programs has still been low. And just recently, we have another challenge. Youth programs which could be donor funded also risk closure given the changes in foreign policy by international countries. So these are just a few of the challenges facing the youth today. However, of course, it's not necessary to address each and every issue in the upcoming budget. Many economists would argue that. So we just want to prioritize about 3 or 4 of the issues that have the most significant impact. So in about 20 seconds, I'd now like to take a moment to just hear from you via the chat. Let me know which issues you feel should be given priority in the upcoming budget. Of course, I'd already prepared the slides, so I'll just be trying to see if we align. And as you reflect on it, here are some of the questions that we will be answering as we go along. So the first one being, what are some of the economic issues facing the youth of Kenya? How does government spend its money on solving the problems and why? What mechanisms can be used to influence the prioritization of youth-related issues in the budget? And lastly, I'll conclude with key incentives, tax reforms, and strategies that could improve the living standards of the youth. So hoping you've already taken a moment, and these are some of the big socioeconomic issues that are facing the youth. The first one being youth employment, unemployment, and underemployment. So we'll be talking a little bit about that and some of our proposals on them. Increased taxation and high cost of living, high cost of doing business as well. And here we'll be focusing on some indicators such as energy prices, cost of credit, and taxation. And lastly, public discontent on fiscal policies and the impact of public debt and also the budgetary constraints. So we'll begin with the youth employment, unemployment, and underemployment. So the economic survey by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics 2024 did an analysis of economic activity deprivation among youths and adults. And the definition is any youth between the ages of 18 and 25 are considered economically deprived if they are neither in education, employment, or training. So this is a group that can be at risk because they're not gaining skills or experience required for future employment opportunities. And remember, just 5 years to 2030, we are supposed to be attaining the double-digit economic growth. And even for those who are employed, they might be working fewer hours than needed or in jobs that don't provide securities or fair wages. Underemployment now would mean that there are those who have the necessary skills but are not able to fully utilize them in their current jobs. So the graph on the right, it should be on the right side of your screen. The incidence of deprivation in economic activity among people aged between 26 and 34 decreased to 55% from 74%. It could be a very good decade to be a youth. And perhaps it also suggests that there were many other programs that could have led to it in terms of employment and training opportunities. The data also shows that in rural areas, that should be the third bars, the youth and adults also faced more severe deprivation compared to urban areas. So what are some of the findings from the analysis? Over 50% of youth aged between 18 and 25 are not engaged in education, employment, or training, which is a significant concern for future economic growth. Both the youth and adults face challenges with underemployment, job insecurity, and are also in vulnerable employment, which can impact their income, job satisfaction, and overall economic stability. Rural areas suffered the highest levels of deprivation compared to urban areas, and therefore this indicates that there is need for some targeted interventions to boost rural employment. And a positive trend, the employment conditions of young adults between the ages of 26 and 34 improved, which could be as a result of many factors, including that some of the government programs and policies that targeted the youth then might have had a positive impact in reducing the deprivation. So let's look at some of the government programs that the bottom-up transformation agenda has in place. And over the last 3 years, the government has allocated funds to various youth development programs. As you can see, the training of about 200,000 youth on skills development, which resulted in 187,000 employment opportunities. This is as per the National Treasury data. It also disbursed loans worth 1.24 billion to 95,000 youth entrepreneurs. And there were also some 83 youth empowerment centers that were operationalized. It further identified and nurtured 5,200 youth talents and engaged 3,915 youth in green jobs. And the government still plans to disburse more money to more youth entrepreneurs and also engage more youth in training, apprenticeships, and also other technical skills. So while these numbers present some positive gains by the government, the numbers are still low compared to the population growth. Remember, those under 35 are more than 75%. Over to the second issue, increased taxes and cost of living. So the youth were already facing high unemployment rates and unemployment are still vulnerable to the impact of rising taxes and the cost of living. And you can imagine this combined with high taxes, limited job opportunities, and rising prices for essential goods and services can also reduce their purchasing power and quality of life. So last year we witnessed some measures or developments that the government undertook in reducing the impact of cost of living, which in agriculture, it continued to roll out fertilizer and seed subsidies to farmers to ensure that there was food security. Around June last year, there was the withdrawal of the finance bill, and consequently, the government has been introducing tax administrative and policy reforms through public participation. There was a stabilization of the Kenyan shilling against major international and regional currencies, the dollar, sterling pound, and euros. And inflation also did decline to 3% in December 2024. However, there's still a feel that the benefits of lower inflation have not fully translated into the improved purchasing power for majority of the Kenyans.
Noire Nyomba, Madam Noire, you can call her.
So on the third point, this is on the high cost of doing business. And I know we have a representative from IPRA who would be shedding more light into this. So there are a number of indicators that can be used to analyze the cost of doing business. But for my presentation, I only focused on 3. So that's energy prices, cost of credit, and increased taxation, which I will be talking to them as I relay my budget proposals. So this is just a SWOT analysis of some of the points that we've discussed. So the strengths, we have a high youth population, we have a vibrant and growing informal sector. The youth are well-trained, educated, creative, and innovative. Under the weaknesses, over 50% of youth aged between 18 and 25 are not engaged in education, employment, or training. There is a low turnout of trainees for youth programs and projects, despite the heavy investment by government. There are limited job opportunities, the high cost of doing business, and that the opportunities, there is the growth in informal sector and MSMEs. There are also new job opportunities in the digital economy, and also the creativity of the youth. But under the threats, increased mental health concerns, there have been social and digital unrests from the youth, political uncertainty and patronage, which I'll be talking to them a little bit, public discontent on fiscal policies, economic uncertainty, and corruption. So what are some of the mechanisms that can be used to influence the prioritization of youth-related issues in the budget? So we came up with 3 points. So politicians have the desire to leave a legacy, especially with the youth, which helps to strengthen their support base. And now that we are midway, there could be some re-election prospects that are closely tied to how effectively youth issues are addressed, because the youth would be a significant electoral bloc. So that also supports why the focus on the youth. Secondly, having the youth engage in productive activities would be seen as a key economic indicator for growth and stability, because the government would be trying to reduce social unrest, perhaps prevent youth migration, and also harness the potential of the country's largest demographic. And lastly, addressing youth unemployment and inclusion is also critical for national security as well. So now, in a bid to address the youth employment and underemployment issue, there's need to encourage the youth to engage in sectors that are leading contributors to our GDP. And as per the KNBS data, the sectors are as outlined on my presentation, with accommodation and food services leading the growth trajectory in 2024, which was mostly driven by a surge in both domestic and international tourism. And it's also still expected to remain a strong contributor of Kenya's economic growth in 2025. The ICT sector as well continues to reshape the economy in many fronts. This is due to the increased digital adoption, and it would also remain a key focus for growth. Thirdly, the financial and insurance sector. It was partially stable, which also continues to attract both domestic and international investments. Real estate as well, given the urbanization trends and the need for infrastructure development in our 5 major cities, likely to also support sustained performance. There was a slowdown in agriculture, forestry, and fishing, but still this remains vital for both national and especially county level economic stability. Wholesale and retail trade also experienced a slowdown due to a slow domestic consumption, global supply chain challenges, which limited its potential for stronger growth. And the weakest performers in 2024 was mining and construction, which was a major concern for construction because the industry is one of the primary pillars of affordable housing under the government's beta, and it is also key in employing the youth. So in the next 5 minutes, I'll be taking you through some of our budget proposals, and I'll begin from my last point on the industrial sector. The industrial sector comprises of manufacturing, electricity, water supply, and also construction. So I'll begin with the manufacturing sector. The sector plays a very critical role in growing the economy and also in youth employment. As per the KNBS data, the sector also had an increased employment. But despite this increased employment, there was a declining sector performance. Similarly, also the construction sector had a decline in performance. And as I mentioned, this is one of the primary pillars of affordable housing under the government's beta that employs the youth. So what are some of our recommendations? One, we need to have policies that encourage youth employment in participation in the manufacturing sector, including incentives for businesses to employ young people. The National Treasury should also encourage innovation with a focus on enhancing product quality, automation, and export capacity for Kenya. The government to also invest in programs that enhance the competitiveness of the manufacturing sector and address some of the challenges faced by non-food manufacturing industries, which had a declining performance. The government should also create targeted incentives for the other key subsectors such as textiles, agro-processing, and construction to help them remain competitive both locally and internationally as well. And given that the government is going green, our focus should be on sustainable construction practices and green building technologies. Still continuing on the industrial sector, for the sector to remain competitive, a skilled workforce is very essential. And one of our key policy recommendations here are to increase funding to TVET programs that provide industry-relevant skills. And also budget provisions should be supporting industries that adopt sustainable practices through some incentives, and also having a unified regulatory framework. Over to the risks that I had mentioned earlier. This pertain to the socioeconomic issues facing the youth. So under the cost of doing business, we recommend implementing a single and predictable national tax policy to reduce compliance costs and boost business investments. For the slowed growth in agriculture due to it being rain-fed, we propose investing in irrigation infrastructure, climate resilient crops, and weather forecasting systems that reduce dependency on rain-fed agriculture. For the declining private sector credit, we ask the government to prioritize policies that improve access to credit for MSMEs, reduce interest rates, and also encourage PPPs to spur private sector investment. And at the cost of living, implement some targeted subsidies, including wage adjustments to address cost of living concerns. And this should be done without distorting the market incentives. And lastly, on corruption, we propose that there should be youth participation in the budget process, and also enforcing some stricter penalties for corrupt practices. And this is all in a bid to improve public trust and also economic stability. On inflation developments, the decline in inflation was largely attributed to food and fuel prices. And because benefits of low inflation have not fully translated into the improved purchasing power for a majority of Kenyans, we recommend that besides lowering fuel-related inflation, the government should consider a combination of policy tools, such as lowering of interest rates and among other considerations. Under the private sector credit, we saw that there was a decline, especially in manufacturing, finance, insurance, and also the construction subsector. And one of our main recommendations is that there needs to be financial literacy to build the capacity for the players in the sector to take up credit, since these sectors are critical to employment creation, especially for the youth, and also wealth accumulation. Other proposals are also to reduce domestic borrowing to free resources for private sector, to incentivize banks through targeted monetary mechanisms to provide credit to the private sector, and also having the CBK at the forefront of developing and implementing policies that are accommodative to both the cost of credits and to businesses as well. So our final proposals to support the youth on the issues I had enumerated earlier. So we propose that there is a need to carry out a comprehensive national labor survey to provide up-to-date data to address some of the issues that youth face, especially in employment and also dealing with the unemployment challenge. And on this, there is need also for clear data on, for instance, how many new taxpayers are registered every year, what is the number of the previously registered individuals who are not active taxpayers but are now active taxpayers, the number of taxpayers within the youth demographic, and how much their contribution is also so that would all be in a bid to just have a proper survey to address those challenges. We also recommend that there needs to be preparation and sensitization of Kenyan immigrants on the nature of jobs abroad in terms of their working conditions, their rights, obligations, and also remedies in the case of violations. Increased budget allocation towards rehabilitation of talent development facilities and also supporting the digital economy, developing a framework that encourages business innovation at the county level. Remember, we saw that the youth are undergoing high levels of deprivation, especially in rural areas. And with the government going green and also focusing on sustainability, there is need for green energy innovations and enterprises in all counties, and also the investment in conversion of waste to wealth would be important. So as I conclude, it is my hope that you have gained some insight into the economic issues facing the youth, and you will resonate with me on why it should be a budget priority for 2025-2026. So I leave you with the words of former US President John F. Kennedy, who once said that the future promise of any nation can be directly measured by the present prospects of its youth. Thank you all for your attention. I now hand it back to Raphael Moya.
Thanks, Tony, for your presentation. And I will not do a summary of it, but what you have shared with us is that there are pertinent issues that as a country that we need to address. But what you have mentioned to us is that, number one, is that you have shared with us key issues in terms of why focus then in the youth. Number two, you have shared with us some of the socio-economic issues that affect the youth, issues to do with high cost of living, issues to do with high taxation, issues to do with unemployment. And then you have gone ahead to show us in terms of what has been the priorities in terms of government. Where has the government be focused on? And one of the things that you have mentioned is the issues to do with the training of skills, and of course the issues of around disbursement. And then from there, you have shared with us what are some of the incentives that the government can be able to chip in so that we can be able to develop our youth. And finally, you have shared with us some of the key budget proposals that we need to work on. And one of the things that you have mentioned is that we need to incentivize our manufacturing sectors so that we can be able now to shift the production curve. So thank you very much. And we hope we will be able to synthesize these proposals into concrete ideas where we will be able now to share with the National Treasury, but also with the Parliament in terms of the issues, the emerging issues from our partners. Thank you so much, Tony. And then now we move on to our final presenter. Dennis has not yet responded. And our third presenter is Dr. John Mutua. John Mutua works with the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, IPRA, and he'll be sharing with us some key issues in the energy and petroleum sector in Kenya. So without further ado, I want to invite Dr. John Mutua.
Mainly my focus will be on electricity and petroleum, generally the energy sectors. So just a brief on EPRA and EPRA mandate, especially when it comes to economic regulation issues which do affect or aligned with budgeting processes. And EPRA mandate, of course, we have a mandate in the energy and petroleum, and especially energy pricing. And we also have a mandate for licensing, enforcement, and also consumer protection, including public education, because we need to educate Kenyans because of the nature and the safety requirements of the services that we regulate. And then I'll also be looking at the energy and petroleum sectors in details, and then also budget proposals and justifications. Our mandate as a regulator, and because we are established by the law, is to undertake technical and economic regulation of electricity, renewable energy, downstream coal-bed methane, gas, and also petroleum sectors. Now, energy and the petroleum sectors are engines of all economic spheres, from transportation, mining, manufacturing. Yesterday, I did listen to Kenya Association of Manufacturers, and most of the issues they were also bringing about also touch also on the energy sector. So the sectors really are key when it comes to the way we produce our goods, the way we transport them, and even the way we provide other services, including telecommunication, which cannot run without energy. With a monthly petroleum import bill of around 300 million US dollars, that is monthly fuel imports, we do oversee and legislate revenues in excess of about 3.6 billion US dollars, or close to 600 billion in the petroleum sector alone per year. And also in the financial year 22-23 financial years, including even the 2023-24, IPP's revenue from the sale of power to KPLC was over 90 billion Kenya shillings. Just a brief, because I know many of us may not be following some of the statistics or maybe some of the key developments within the energy and petroleum sector. It's good to bring on board these issues, because they do affect when it comes to making provisions for budget proposals. The energy sector in Kenya, starting with electricity, we have installed capacity of about 3,300 megawatts, and our peak demand has reached 2,300 megawatts. Peak demand is the highest and demand that is attained at any consumption point, and normally it is attained about 8:30 p.m. in the night, when most of the Kenyans are consuming power and industries are still operational. So we have been able to increase Jodamo, the power that we generate from Jodamo. We have about 940 megawatts. From hydro, we have 839 megawatts. From wind, 436 megawatts. From solar, at the moment, we have 210 megawatts. From petrothermal, we have 572 megawatts. And biomass, we do have 2 megawatts. We are also interconnected with our neighbors, Uganda, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. We have a power import agreement with Ethiopia for 200 megawatts that is going to be increased to 400 megawatts in the next 3 years. And from Uganda, we do have a power exchange of about 50 megawatts that is traded across the borders. And last year in December, we interconnected also with Tanzania, TANESCO. That is the Tanzania power company, TANESCO, is also now interconnected with KPLC. Just to say that, and I do agree with Njuma that Kenya price in green energy, 91% of our electricity that you consume is green energy. And of course, geothermal now is the biggest contributor of our power, followed by hydro, and then wind power. And we do have some imports from Ethiopia, 11%, and thermal power generation that it comes from diesel plants is about 8%, and solar 4%. So this is very important when it comes to climate policy, even coming up with climate finance, because if we are to maintain our generation mix, then we have to have programs that promote the same. We do have a time of use tariffs. Yesterday, listening to the manufacturers, this is a program we have been implementing with the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. And we usually, because demand during the night, as you can see from the what I've showing in the chart above here, is that during the night, that is from midnight, or maybe actually from 11 p.m., demand goes as low as 1,300 megawatts. But by morning, maybe by 6 in the morning, the demand picks up, and it is sustained up to about 5 p.m. when again there is another spike, because most demand happens in the evening. So within the night, then we have a program of time of use where we encourage manufacturers to consume the excess power, and they get a 50% discount on the units that are that they consume. And of course, is the formula that we implemented sometimes has been punitive to the manufacturers, and so we are working with them to revise it so that it can be more competitive, and also explore new ways of designing the peak tariff in addition to that, the government may need to introduce the 24-hour economy, other programs that support 24-hour economies, because even if you say people consume power at night, you need to have to increase the number of employees who work at night, given that also employers have to pay for certain costs on labor. Then the government needs also to look at that. The other issue I want to mention is the access rate, because the government, through the National Ministry of Energy and National Treasury, has supported electrification program in line with our Vision 2030. At the moment, we are about actually 9.9 million. By the end of the last financial year, that is June, we had about 9.6 or 9.7 million customers that are connected to the grid. This has increased by December to about 9.9 million. And it is important that even as we expand the network also comes with its own requirements. It also means that not all Kenyans are connected, because we are talking about 77% of Kenyans now being connected to power. So there's another 23%, and this 23% is a bit expensive, because these are the people who are very far from the grid. So priorities for government to still allocate money, because energy is a basic good. Electricity is a basic. It's not a luxury anymore. It's a basic good. And the government needs to prioritize the remaining 23% of the population to be connected. But nevertheless, we are doing well. We have been able in the last 10 years to achieve certain milestones. Coming to petroleum, the importation of petroleum that comes through the port of Mombasa, we have not seen major changes. Actually, in the last 4 years, we have been able to just almost see a stagnated consumption or importation of petroleum products. Of course, imports from Uganda pass through here. So what I'm showing, like in the year 2020-21, we had about 8.7 million tons. And these are just slightly increased to 9.2 million tons in the year 22-23. And the last financial year, that went down to about 9 million metric tons in the year 2023-24. And that shows you really petroleum has not been increased as such. So this has implication for tax and design, because of course, because we are not seeing major increases in the imports of these products, then you have to get to a place where now the government says, okay, these are enough taxes, because any further taxation maybe could be also be affecting the consumption. And what you see is like this is a domestic consumption. What I showed before was what is coming from all the countries going to Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, or even South Sudan as well, and also North Tanzania. But for Kenya now, in 2020, we were consuming about 5.4 million cubic meters, and these almost remain the same. It went to 5.7, 5.5, and 5.4, meaning that we have not actually, the demand has reduced in the last financial year in the case of Kenya. Now, just to mention about the LPG strategy, the per capita consumption of LPG by 2023 stood at about 7 kilos per person. And the aim of government is to achieve 15 kilos. That is what is considered as a global benchmark, especially for countries that are in the middle income level. And the government is developing various reforms to increase the per capita consumption. These reforms take the shape of developing infrastructure and revamping the existing regulatory framework. Some of the opportunities identified to increase LPG consumption include development of the LPG legislated systems and LPG smart metering. So these are things that we will be seeking support of the government in order to be implemented. Criteria for installation of autogas refilling stations. Many vehicles now can be able to use LPG because it's cleaner than the petrol powered vehicles. So again, supporting, of course, these are regulatory function, but again, also what we realize is that as we move into autogas in stations, they are also benefiting on incentives that directly go into the households when it comes to cooking and all that. And you see like the people who are driving their vehicles, they like using LG or diesel or super, they pay road maintenance levy. Autogas does not have this. So there are also implications of government revenue that will be we need to discuss. Then you have licensing of LPG installers and cylinders manufacturing companies. We need to encourage a lot of companies to come. Implementation of the cylinder tracking to curb illegal refilling. This is an area that requires resources, because if you are to track the way the gas cylinder, that mutungi you have in the house moves, we need to introduce technology to track that. That requires resources. And then also data verification to enhance LPG uptake monitoring, and also roll out the LPG institutions. And this is having all the schools, high schools, TVET institutions and universities embrace LPG. Of course, universities and others have embraced LPG, but some of the schools have not done that. And in order to manage climate issues, we need to have incentives and also government support within the education ministry to support that. And again, just this slide just shows the progression of LPG consumption in metric tons, where we have come from and where we are going. The energy sector is critical. For example, just to mention, like when you look at the sectors that are within the energy sector, like for example, KenGen is about is a 70% owned by government, with over 65% market share in power generation, and is about 516 billion, in terms of assets. KPLC, 50.1 government owned, and is a power distribution and retail company, assets about 353.7 billion. We do have Ketraco. Ketraco, this is a transmission company. They have 100% owned by government, 221 billion. Kenya Pipeline, 100% again owned by government, and 30 billion asset. Rural Education and the Renewable Energy Corporation, 100% owned by GOK, 126 billion. GDC, 100% owned by government, 101 billion. And then NOC, and then NOC is also part of the ownership, is 100% owned by government, but their initiative to see how we can be able to transfer it. So when you look at the total assets, and this is just, I've just mentioned the government entities, is about 1.4 trillion. So the sector that we are regulating is very, very critical to what is happening. If I was to add the private players or the oil marketing companies, we'll move to almost closer to 3 trillion in terms of assets actually. So with the exception of rural education schemes, majority of the sector entities do not rely on the exchequer for support. KPLC, of course, the government will borrow loans, but KPLC will be able to pay that. RELEC gets its budgetary support, partly from the consumers through the levy, but also from government. The authority, that is EPRA, operates on levies and fees collected for the petroleum and the electric customers. And the authority is also expected to remit 90% of its operating surplus to the national treasury. After the end of the year, any surplus that remains, that goes back to the national treasury. I will speak to it as I go, because it has its own challenges. Major operational, and I'm now talking about budget proposals. My presentation is not that big. Major operational challenge is budget approval limits to the authority despite the EU sector mandate. Sometimes we are curtailed on how much you can be able to spend. Yes, we may collect the money through the levies, but again, you'll be the treasury requires you to also manage how you are spending. But then budget squeeze leads to less technical and economic oversight of licensees. And sometimes you have seen, because people are very innovative, they will always want to evade the law and do things that are outside the compliance and the requirements of the licenses. Again, the 90% and the authority currently has also different locations serving as offices due to space limitations. And of course, like having our own office block is very critical, because we spend a lot in terms of rent. The National Treasury underfunding of rural irrigation schemes and rely on KPLC for deficit financing leaves KPLC exports. In most cases, what we have observed is that National Treasury will promise to give REREC money to extend the network, but that money sometimes is never actually remitted or provided for in the actual sense. And that means that KPLC has to sort of like bills for O&M, they have to pay for that, and that exposes the KPLC balance sheet. Again, we have budget cuts. Like for example, we had a haircut for everybody, 30%, and also the remission I've talked about. Again, when it comes to affecting operating surplus of the regulated utilities, this undermines provision of critical services. For example, KenGen, KPLC, KETRACO, REREC, GDC, Kenya Pipeline. We usually have revenue requirements that are provided in the tariff to ensure financial viability, economic feasibility, and also sustainability of the sector. So the moment the Treasury now takes back what we allow in the tariff, because what is allowed in the tariff is supposed to go either to extend the network, to improve the system in terms of operation and maintenance. But sometimes we have seen just budget cuts that are not informed by I think critical evaluation on what that decision means, and that has tended now to affect the way services are supplied. Again, some of the major issues to consider, for example, we have MPs, the members of parliament. Recently, they are proposed to fund the street lighting operations and maintenance program through imposition of a levy on the electricity bills. And again, this is despite it being a county function, because counties are supposed to provide budgetary provision in their budgets for street lighting. So unless we are careful, we may find, again, the cost of doing business as consider transmission infrastructure and development levy. I know levies are not popular, but if we are to extend our network and have a viable network and inviting the private sector to participate, we may need to have, it had been proposed in 2016 by the National Treasury, by then Cabinet Secretary who was there. And for me, it was a good proposal, but I think it has never been implemented. Then also there is the establishment of the energy fund. This energy fund, in the absence of the levies, we can have the energy fund that can be used to de-risk or even undertake transaction on advisories, because some of the transactions that are undertaken in the country, sometimes we have not seen a lot of involvement of transaction advisory before decisions are made, and such a fund can provide resources that can be used for that. We also need to review the Energy Act to provide for commercial and industrial customers with huge installed capacity via PPS, paying some electrification levies as well. And of course, we need to sustain taxes on EVs. The government in 2023 Finance Bill or Finance Act of 2023 introduced measures to support electric mobility. But again, we have seen, if we are not careful, we may wipe out some of these incentives. And if the Treasury takes away the incentives, it means now the sector that is taken off is not going to grow as fast. We have seen EVs grown by almost at 300%, and electricity consumption for EVs also growing by almost close to 400% in the last 1 year. So we should not wipe some of these benefits. In order to promote generation, we need to, of course, de-risk geothermal resources. So support to GDC and also undertaking of feasibility studies by the Ministry of Energy also needs to get a lot of support from the National Treasury. This is an area where, because there's a lot of capital that's required to drill a well, for example, a geothermal well, or even putting wind masts and ensuring that we map out our resources very well. This is important because if we're going to roll our program and even introduce competition in the procurement of renewables, we need to be aware of where the resources are and even where the transmission networks are. We need also to provide incentives to support renewable energy auctions, tax allowances during construction, these are important. They really help FDI, because there's a time FDI, we did very well as a country with FDI. And when you look at it, when you're investing in the likes of like Turkana, like Kipeto Wind, solars, we had about 120 megawatts of solar that came in. Even FDI in Kenya, we were leading in Africa, but most of it was coming through the power side. Again, we need to provide incentives to fast track the LPG strategy, and again also fast track implementation of the PPP in transmission infrastructure and development. The government does not have enough money to allocate for transmission, and it is important that we onboard more of the private sector when it comes to investing in these critical transmission highways. Again, also we need to have tax concessions on upstream and petroleum gas. I know Donald Trump, as of course, we're not saying we should not use our oil. If we have resources, we should be able to use them. There are other byproducts of oil and gas, plastics, fertilizer, and all these things. We should be able to promote our upstream side. Then the other issue is we also need to market Kenya as a hub of oil and gas. And this is something like, road shows. We shouldn't be able to support the government to undertake road shows across other markets, and also encourage enhanced PPPs in ensuring we have a common user storage for LPG to unlock private capital. So I think that is Raphael, that is what I had to share.
What you have shared with us is the key development in both the energy and petroleum sector. And also you have been able to share with us some of the key budget proposals that you want to see implemented by the National Treasury, but also what are some of the emerging issues coming from the energy sector. So thank you very much. And I think now we do not have our fourth presenter, and therefore I think it is the right time we go to the plenary session where our participants will get an opportunity to ask a question or even a concern, or even add any issue that with regard to the social sector. And for this particular session, what we will do is that we are going to use our floating bar. You can either raise your hand or even post a question, which I'll be able to read, and then I'll be able to direct the question to the right person. We have three presenters: Dr. Andrew Riechi, we have Tony Juma, and we have Dr. John Mutua. So, and both of them, each one of them has done a presentation on the education sector, the youth sector, and also we have done a presentation on the energy and petroleum sector. So we welcome any question. You can raise your hand. I'll be able to see you, and then I'll be able to direct the question. In the meantime, I have one question that has been posted by John Mutua, and I think this question is directed to Dr. Andrew Riech. And the question is on the question of the financial year 25-26. In the immediate term, the education sector share of budget is estimated to be around 26%. As the sector receives the lion's share, the education sector has been receiving the highest allocation. And given that we are facing a narrow fiscal space, should the question of adequacy still arise, or is it the question of two other proposals that you should make effectiveness and efficiency in spending? Any thoughts on resource distribution in the sector with regard to the equity? I think that question is directed to Dr. Andrew Riechi. I hope you have been able to note that. And then I haven't seen a hand, anyone raising a hand. Or I assume participants are still working on their comments or questions. If we do not have any question, I think
can you repeat the questions?
Uh-huh. The question is, the question has been asked by John Mutua, and he's asking this. The estimated budget allocation for the education sector for the financial year 2025-2026 is estimated to be around 26%, meaning that education sector still remain receive the lion's share of the national budget. And given the physical space that we have as a country, the question of adequacy, the one which you addressed first, is asking whether the question of adequacy, in terms of saying that we do not have more resources in the sector, should it arise? That is the question that he's asking. And then he also questions the issue of equity in allocating, in distribution of the resources that are allocated to the education sector to the various programs.
Thank you very much, Raphael, and John for raising the question. It is anybody's guess, and I said this, that public resources are not adequate, and you know, you can get the information from all the reports, the economic surveys over the years, and I'm talking as a practitioner, as an education economist who is keenly following what's happening in the education sector. 26% of the budget going to the education sector, I may not be qualified to say that it's adequate when I know that the available resources are not adequate in the first place. And that's why my short presentation mainly focused on the key areas on adequacy. I can say without any shadow of doubt that the government of Kenya is still constrained financially to raise appropriate or the adequate resources, because if we went down to the details of this 26%, against all the institutions, in fact, they are increasing every other day. Education institutions, they are increasing, and I am not guessing, but I'm aware that those institutions that are funded by the government of Kenya, that means public education institutions, do not receive adequate funding, and it would be a miracle if the government can provide the 26% to the education sector for it to be adequate. So we need more details, and I'm sorry I did not anticipate this. I could have indicated, but if it's an increase from what was done last year or in the previous financial year or the current financial year, that is a good progress, but I am aware that the resources are not adequate, and that's why higher education institutions are constrained to undertake their mandates. Imagine that some of the public universities offering engineering courses reportedly are training or are teaching their students in lecture halls, those who are doing civil engineering, or they used to, but I think the situation hasn't changed in some of those newly established universities and which are replicating academic programs that have been offered in some of the established and old public universities in Kenya. So it could be an improvement, but the resources may not be adequate because of where we are. The country is rolling out the competence-based curriculum, which is quite resource, resource heavy. That requires heavy amounts of resources because it's practical or skills oriented. And some of them, as media always shows, some of those institutions that are implementing or expected to implement junior or to hold senior schools are not well prepared. The facilities are wanting. Now, equity is an important consideration, and I like John Mutua's inclusion of equity as one of those key factors that should be considered in resource allocation to the education sector. Equity means fairness, ensuring that all stakeholders or learn types of learners or institutions or communities are catered for. So it's an important consideration, and it's important that we raise it so that the government treasury can ensure that resources are equitably allocated. We are talking of some institutions with the learners who are differently abled. All right. In the past, we used to talk about learners who are disabled, but that is negative. We should be talking about learners who are abled differently. And the institutions hosting some of those learners require a lot of resources and even skilled teachers and manpower and resources to ensure that they receive quality education by highly skilled manpower. So equity, regional, right? All counties, as well as different levels. In fact, like the early institutions for early years of learning, that is what we used to call preschools, require highly specialized teachers. In some countries, and I'm aware that in Canada, for example, no teacher can be hired or is considered ready or prepared to teach those early years of learning, right? Learners in those early grades, especially pre-primary, as we used to call it, unless that teacher has a master's degree in psychology and then skills in teaching. But in Kenya, it's different. We have most of those who are handling learners at that level are those who have either certificate or diploma in teaching, and something needs to be done. So equity is an important consideration which must be considered in allocating resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Riechi. I can see a hand up. Leo Kimboy, please unmute and share
Yes.
your concern. Yes.
Yes. So I have two questions to Dr. Riechi, but also to Mutua. So Dr. Riechi, this question, I want you to see it as asking ourselves some difficult questions. And the question is very simple, that is it time now for a discussion on efficiency in the education sector? And I want to give you two anecdotes. So if, for example, on the human resource side, Kenya has now, and I've looked at the latest reports that suggest that Kenya's number of teachers that go up as high as 425,000 teachers. Majority of them are within what we call the urban areas, the urban areas. And this, so first, there's a question whether, one, those numbers are true, because no verifiable audit has been done in the last 20 years. Secondly, that those numbers are concentrated within fewer areas. And that's why the question, a policy like delocalization, is a big policy problem in this country, is a big policy question. No one is willing to debate that question with. So, and that's the thing. If you look at even textbooks, public schools still buy textbooks at some of them, some very ridiculous prices, and these are bought from a centralized source. You spoke even about the question of children who are differently able. One of the things that we realized is that there are some grants that are issued by the ministry from time to time, others receiving as high as 50, 100 million. But those resources do not go towards children who are differently able. As the institute, we visited some of those schools, and we can see there's a problem of resource allocation. So that's why I'm asking that this efficiency question could be that some resources actually are more on one side and are not going into the right priorities, because and that's a question that we would really like to understand. At 26% of the entire expenditure, what is it that the ministry is buying, and whether that is whether that is something that needs to be checked on. The second question, and as you think about that, especially like on the labor side and on resources that go directly to different schools, and even how those resources are applied, both at national level and in those to meet those regional equity problems. The second question to Dr. Mutua is, you've explained to us, fantastic presentation. We share some of those concerns. One thing that I was just thinking and trying to ask myself, and I want to remain persuaded, is that you say, for example, government should promote Kenya as a destination of oil and gas. Government should. Then I ask myself, is it? And then you mentioned something that is a very powerful anecdote, that members of parliament want to add a levy to the electricity tariff that would allow them to fund through the NCGDF street lighting provision across Kenya. Street lighting is a public good. So my question is it should we in the energy sector should the priority in the energy sector only be on public goods and not the energy sector, especially the regulator, determining the winners? For example, saying that we like to see the gas to move to this LPG gas to move to on a per capita basis to this amount of kgs. You said so should it be that as the energy sector, the focus of government should only be on public goods element of the electricity provision or energy provision, and then the rest let the market organize the market, or let the market determine where the rest would be? Because that problem that you're mentioning, because all these budget priorities that you're mentioning about resources is what has led members of parliament to say there's a tariff here. Everybody, EPRA, Warma, everybody has a tariff, has a share here. And we have an urgent political problem, which is people are complaining about street lighting. Let's also add our own tariff here, because that's an unintended consequence of how fiscal priorities end up being generated. Thank you. I hope I'm not belaboring my points, Raphael. Thank you.
Thanks, Leo. I think what we do is that I'll read another question in the chat. Yes, from Philomena. And the question is, on energy, there is more focus on electricity and LPG for households and institutions through the LPG growth strategy. What about other alternative sources like bioenergy, which has high potential to drive adoption of clean cooking solutions? I think that question is directed again to Dr. Mutua. Another question from to Dr. Mutua is increasingly, the National Treasury continue to train their eyes on the surplus that the state-owned enterprises make as a own source of revenue, especially now, given that the Kenya debt vulnerability, and yet we have mentioned that this has an adverse impact on the state-owned enterprises, operations, and balances. So, what should we looking forward to for these state-owned enterprises still receiving any transfer from the government amidst the ongoing reconstructions of the parastatus? Again, that question goes to Dr. Mutua. I think we follow this order. I think most questions now goes to Dr. Mutua. I think we give you the first priority going in the reverse order. Going to, and any other question, Tony, you are able to answer, you can pick, and then we go to Dr. Andrew Riechi. Dr. Mutua, karibu.
Thank you very much, Raphael, and thank you very much. I think it was Leonard, or
Rio Kiboi.
Leo Kibol for
Yes.
for those good questions. One, maybe I want to say that, of course, there is always a reason why the government has to promote the sector. Whether, like, for example, when I talked about promotion of oil and gas sectors, even the issues of street lighting, as you have mentioned, and of course, I was listening to your advice on, I mean, concentrating on public goods and let the market also be able to deliver, because of course the market is a business resource, is the best resource allocator when it comes to matching supply and demand. But when you look at the nature of the services of electricity and gas, sometimes you might find there is some monopoly in it. Like some of the entities, like the pipeline, for example, is a natural monopoly, and it also has to be sort of regulated, and otherwise monopolies will always exert power. And the same to electricity. So I do agree with you on some of these areas. And of course, as a regulator, and when you look even at the enablers, even within Vision 2030, the aim is to ensure that we empower markets. But you empower markets through enabling regulations. You can have good regulations that will ensure that even where entities are regulated, they almost operate like the private sector. But what I also want to mention is that although I did not mention it in the presentation, we have already developed electricity market open access regulations, which actually are awaiting the cabinet secretary's signature before they are forwarded to the Attorney General and the National Assembly. Once those are gazetted, then we will be able to move. We will be able to even license more distribution companies in addition to Kenya Power, and also ensure that even we have a capacity market, energy market in the country, including even what we call day-ahead market. You can be able to buy electricity that you'll be able to consume tomorrow. You order it for today, and then it will be reserved for you in the system, and you consume that tomorrow. So, and those are the regulations that have to be developed in order for the market to operate. Now, coming to the issue of CDF related to that, what the members, and I think I need to clarify this, what the members of parliament said, it is not an issue of like that money is going to go to CDF. It is a money that will go to Kenya Power. And what they were saying is that since most of the street lighting, when they are installed, they don't work in the towns. So you find that the street lighting are there, but it is dark. They don't pay bills, or even when there is just one gadget in the installed facilities for those street lighting fails, there is nobody who is coming to maintain it, and that was attributed to maybe underfunding. And we have a special street lighting tariff that is of 7 shillings. But again, even with that, you find uh, counties owe Kenya Power a lot of money. The county governments, they owe Kenya Power a lot of money. And again, okay, of course, for us, we are saying, since the county government are also supposed to undertake electrification and electricity, electrification of electricity and gas, um, we don't want to have uh, double double counting or maybe double payments for services. Either one of them is worse than the other. So, but I do agree with you. I think this is an area we are discussing the government. But as I said, where like we have private sector participation, like in power generation, we have private sector companies allowed to generate electricity. Even now we are looking at even having more private companies in transmission and even licensing and distribution company. And this is both in electricity and also in oil and gas. When you look at oil and gas, it's purely private sector. The government just manages the open tender system, but when it comes to selling the petroleum products and market interventions, once you have set the rules, it is a market that continues to guide the services and goods market. The other issue is on you have talked about the focus on LPG and electricity. I think that is another question from the chat, and the question is, what about other energy sources? I would like to say that, of course, my presentations are limited mainly to the major the major sectors, that is electricity and gas. It doesn't mean the government is not focusing on the other sources. Like, for example, we have a strategy for bioenergy. There is a within my presentation, I could have mentioned that within bioenergy, we are looking at first of all promoting all our sugar factories. Like that, you have seen a lot of reviving the sugar factories in Western Kenya and also at the coast. The aim is also to have power generation. Most of them are power generation, and we want to utilize that generation that they have. There is installed capacity of almost close to over 100 megawatts of electricity from bagasse. That is the waste from the sugar. Once the sugar has been milled, that waste, that is bagasse, is used to generate electricity. And then also we have a biogas program that is even being extended to schools. And you know, we have portable technologies now where you can install a small digester, biodigester, even within your farm. So there's a strategy, and even there are guidelines within government that have been developed that are guiding all that. I think the next time I come to the forum, I will also be able to touch on some of these things. Now, the other question was on the that the National Treasury continues to focus on surplus to entities, which should be, and what should we be looking forward to? Should they be, should they be allowed to run like? How should this be? I think the way I understood the question is that, of course, I argued this way because, as I said, sometimes when you look at electricity, which is provided by almost companies that are near monopoly, the tariff is regulated. So you give them enough money to pay for the energy purchase, pay for the transmission cost, and also pay for distribution. At the moment, by the way, in electricity, we don't have subsidies. We only have a cross subsidization for the domestic and small commercial tariff. And that cross subsidization is paid by the other customer. So the energy sector is able to pay for itself. But the reason why we are saying the government should avoid like looking at whenever there is a surplus that a company has not spent before the year ends, or even where we have budget cuts, like the haircut that was given to everybody, the circular of last year, where like because we did not get the Finance Act 2024, so we had to reduce the expenditures by 30%. Whereas that was good when it comes to certain sectors. For some sectors that can happen and nothing will happen. But when it comes to the energy and the petroleum sectors, when you don't provide the revenue requirements, it means you are depriving those utilities critical revenues that they use to be able to provide this critical service in a safe and secure manner. So that is a compromise that we are looking at. But I think going forward, what we are looking at as we embrace more reforms within the energy and petroleum sectors, we are looking at even the National Treasury. In 2008, the National Treasury had a circular that was your commercial parastatals. We look at that circular, a rate of return was introduced. Like the commercial entities that are even government could actually earn a return on the investment. So that was the first step, and we have never moved even after that. So I think entities within the sector, I think they should be allowed to run commercially. Of course, there are times the government will come to intervene, but we need to strengthen their boards. We need to strengthen their operations and their management, so they are run more commercially. And what you have seen, like for example, we have been following companies like Ketraco. I mean, the company like Kenya Power and Kengen, because of embracing governance and the various forms that have been instituted, Kenya Power has returned back to profitability within the last 1 year, and even this year they are back into they have improved their services, and even that goes into the quality of service that they are likely to onboard, and also the kind of investors that they attract to invest in their network, because you need from both development partners and also DFIs and also from hedge funds. Yeah, like hedge funds also provide a critical service. So I think that is what I will say for now, Raphael, and I hope I've been able to answer or I've attempted to answer the questions. Thank you very much.
Tony, do you have anything to mention? If not, then I think there was a question directed to Dr. Andrew Riechi from Rio.
Yes, the question was about whether we can talk about an efficient system given that the budget is about 26% going to the education sector. And he mentioned about the inadequate or numbers of teachers, textbooks, and the differently abled learners who are not well catered for. I say it will be quite some time before we can say that the budgetary or the planned budgetary allocations to education is adequate, and that the resources that are allocated to the sector are efficiently utilized. Most of us have heard of inappropriate conducts of some heads of institutions, not only in the basic education subsector, but even in the higher education subsector. So there are issues of governance of education institutions, and that's why as an educationist, I am aware of the role of the Ministry of Education directorates, especially the Quality Assurance and Standards Directorate. There's the Directorate of Policy, and the role of Ministry of Education field officers. I think there's need for relevant officers to be facilitated, but in the past you'll find they don't have the resources to even visit schools, all right? At the same time, to know what is happening, to monitor the learning processes, the use of resources, and so on. And in some cases, we see even we are not informed the capacity of the data collection, education data collection from the field, much as we are now in an ICT era. The effectiveness of using technology to collect data from education institutions, all right? If that were done, and especially now that some of the resources, including textbooks, are in soft form, and if the project of tablets for schools were successful, then we could not be talking about costs of textbooks, which are actually higher, which are quite unaffordable. That's why some parents, some learners are not able, some parents cannot afford textbooks, and some of them are delayed to be manufactured or to be processed, to be made available and delivered to schools because of the challenges affecting relevant institutions, including the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development. So we are far from Kenya's education sector being efficient, and I'm not here to blame the officers at different levels, but I think the ministry can do better, especially if the field officers can be empowered to monitor what's happening in education institutions in the field, right, throughout the country, and send appropriate reports to the ministry officials, which are headed by the CS for the Ministry of Education, so that we can limit we hope that those top officers in the Ministry of Education can be spending most of their quality time to check those reports and act appropriately. So let's pray that things will improve, but that those three factors are considered, and now, of course, equity becomes the fourth factor, can be critically considered in making the budgetary allocations to the education sector. In fact, human capital in any country is the one that drives uh, the economy. But without adequate skills, we'll just be having people coming out of schools without appropriate skills because of the issues affecting the education production function, where teachers are playing a key role, resources are required, how they are combined is critical, and that is where we are, and we hope that things will be better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew Riechi, for your answer to that question. I seem not to see any further question. And what I will do right now, I've received a message from Dr. John Mutua indicating that he's attending another meeting, and therefore he has requested that he leave the meeting. So for now, I think we'll go to the last point, that is the parting shot. So I will request both Tony and Juma, in a sentence, what is your parting shot? And Dr. Andrew Riechi, just a parting shot so that we finish the meeting. We start with Tony, and any other additional thing, Tony, you might have. I think there was no question that was addressed to you.
Yes, that was right, Raphael, and thank you so much for this opportunity. So as a parting shot, our socioeconomic issues that we presented were youth employment and underemployment, increased taxation and high cost of living, high cost of doing business, and also a public discontent on fiscal policies. And just listening to Dr. Riechi and also Dr. Mutua and yesterday's presentation on the manufacturing sector and ICT just goes to show how everything is interconnected within the sectors, and also how the prospects for the youth can be empowered through the budgetary prioritization. So thank you so much. That would be my parting shot.
Thank you so much. Dr. Rich, do you have your parting shot?
My parting shot will be, I want to thank the Institute for Economic Affairs for hosting us. And my prayer is let there be meaningful process or efficient processes in the education sector, ensuring that we have adequate teachers, we have the resources that are needed in schools, and we need to encourage the institutions to look elsewhere for funding, and that's where I'm praying that those who have the resources more than they need could set up foundations, and those foundations can support the education sector. Otherwise, with the increasing number of youth and graduate unemployment, even if we have very people who have a lot of resources, we may not enjoy them because unemployment can be a potential source of insecurity in the country, and we need to be helpful to those who are in need. The education sector is quite important, and what happens there is supposed to impact all other sectors. And finally, I would encourage those who have access to some of the young people, the youth, who may be out of school, may have dropped out of school, may have completed primary, secondary schools, but they have nothing to do. Let's encourage them to embrace vocational training, where especially those that are supported by the government. There is no tuition fee. But the youth are not aware. In most cases, political leaders don't want them to know that they can go and become plumbers and other forms of, other types of technical skills, all right? Welding, carpentry and joinery. So we need to find a way of popularizing vocational training and encourage the youth who are in millions in this country that have nothing to do. Thank you so much.
So we have come to the end of our webinar, and I want to first to take this opportunity to say thank you to our presenters for doing a fantastic job in terms of making sure that they have prepared their presentation and making sure having time to come and share with us their thoughts. Number two, our audience. We do not take it for granted each and every time that we have a webinar. You normally share with us your thoughts, and we appreciate for the time that you normally give us. And it's our promise that the Institute of Economic Affairs will always provide this platform where you are able to share with us most of the ideas, particularly during this budget period. Now, where do we go from there? I think what we will do is this: is that we will receive all the proposals from yesterday's corporate sector and then the social sector, and then we synthesize into a memorandum, which we normally dub the citizen alternative budget. Thereafter, we will be able now to share this with the National Treasury, but also with the Parliament. But also we will be able to launch the outcome of what we have already synthesized. So that's number one. Number two is that we have analyzed the budget policy statements. Budget policy statement is usually it sets the expenditures which will be implemented in the next financial year, and therefore we have done the analysis. What does it say? What are emerging issues from the budget policy statement? And the analysis will be out by Monday next week, and therefore we are requesting our audience to be on the lookout on this. And then finally is that we have a new way of doing our registration for the webinars, and that what we do is that we are normally sending a link before the webinar where we would wish to have an understanding of the interest of our audience, and therefore we encourage you to be doing it on time so that we have an understanding of what is the demand, what's the need of our audience. And the Institute of Economic Affairs is a membership organization, and we encourage our audience to always keep in touch with the communication department so that you join and you get to know better about the IEA. Another thing that I need to add is that beside the presentation that we have received, we are requesting any other audience or any other network or person who have proposals to share with us, so that we can be able to consolidate all these ideas together, so that by next week we have a consolidated document that we can be able to share with